had the pleasure of meeting Seif when I first started at thinktv, and our team and I were asking ourselves the questions I think that everyone in this room have been asking about television, about data, about digital, and I thought, okay, well, what should we do? Let's take a look at this from the agency perspective. And I think it's an important piece that will help inform, and certainly has helped to inform what we're presenting today. But really, I don't know that we could have picked a better, in our presentation, it's like we stole everybody else's slides and put them into ours as kind of a summary of the day, because we really are hitting all the topics that we've talked about, and some people have so eloquently described, one of which is TV is the value of television is grossly understated. That may be one of my favorite statements of the day. But in any event, Seif and I are talking about not just the future, because this is one of the things that struck us when we were first working together was, okay, let's talk about addressable, let's talk about programmatic, let's talk about what the future holds. And it turns out that really, you know, and I took some convincing on this, but are we really using television the way it should be used and optimized today? So before we even make that journey into the future, and it's certainly a timeline that all the broadcasters are going down that road, what is the use that we're making of it today? What can we do to help our partners, whether they're agencies or clients, you know, do to get down that road a little bit further? So without further ado, because Seif is actually the really smart one in this, on this panel, so it's going to be over to Seif. We know a few things. These are the things we know for sure. TV drives brand consideration, digital acquisitions, drives revenue, and that TV ROI is actually something that we can measure, which is a great statement. So Seif, let's just do some quick level setting on some facts, things we know for sure. This is I hear every single day. My kids don't watch TV. Nobody watches TV. TV's dead. What do you have to say?
Yeah, so TV being dead is one of many misconceptions, but to me the biggest misconception that kind of raffles me up a little bit is TV is not measurable, and when it comes to it being not measurable, most of that is coming from a comparison with digital. And when you say it's not measurable, does that mean because we can't measure click-through rates and we can't measure conversions? Click-through rates and conversions aren't something that CMO can take to a boardroom. We need to be able to measure it towards sales. There have been disciplines in the market that have enabled us to measure any activity to sale through statistics that we'd love to talk to you a little bit about today. But to really answer your question about whether TV is dying, that's probably the biggest misconception. The truth about that misconception is that it's coming from the fact that we're spending more time online. Yes, we definitely are spending more time online, but as you can see from this graph, there's a lot of studies that prove this too, that most of this time spent online is just additive. It's additive time that we're spending. If anything, it's created more opportunities for us as a whole, TV and digital, to work together in terms of connecting with the consumers, because consumers are more reliant on touch points through media to make their decisions. So when it comes to that, it's really only when we look at the last 9 years, TV has only decreased 1 hour a week in terms of its usage. The rest is just additive in terms of people spending time on social networks, Netflix, which has just been fueled by mobile.
So now I know that this is not going to be the same picture exactly for millennials. It's going to look a little bit, you know, we're going to see a bit of a decline, but still, with respect to millennials, and I know we don't have this in front, but maybe we can make it available later, is it the same thing? Online is additive to some of the TV that they're watching with a decrease in live linear?
Yeah, absolutely. So even millennials, and I think somebody mentioned it earlier today, when it comes to the millennials, they're so fragmented. Millennials are really broad in terms of their usage. I can speak to myself in terms of...
Wait a minute, you're an actual millennial.
Yes, yes.
This is an actual millennial, everybody. This is it, right here. They exist, they're elusive, but they exist. Okay, so then the next question. Okay, Seif, and please tell me that you have the right answer here. Do you have a television set?
I just resubscribed back to my cable.
Nice.
For the last 5 years. 5 years ago, I was like, that's it, I don't need TV.
Wait
Everything's going to be digital.
So 5 years ago when you were, are you close to the end or kind of the middle, or are you the beginning of the millennials?
I'm close to the end of the millennials.
Okay, so 5 years ago when you were in the middle, not so much.
Yeah.
Then you got to the later end, and?
Yeah, and I love watching sports on HD, so nothing can replicate that. You know, streaming it online isn't the same. Plus, I love watching Game of Thrones. Really, we are living in the golden age, the third golden age of television, where premium content is at the best it could ever be. We're seeing cinema actors that are moving into TV. So just the impact and of content available is something else.
Well, I think that's That's my favorite thing ever. Okay, so we know that people are watching television. Does television advertising continue to work?
Absolutely. One of the I forgot which panel it was, but in the morning he said, actually it was Reese from Videology, and he mentioned there's a plethora of studies that continue to prove that. What you're seeing now is one of the studies that we saw. There was a survey that went out, and it turns out that TV is the most noticed and influential advertising channel. A lot of the work that I do is econometric modeling, so we measure halo impacts of TV across other channels. The halo impact of a TV commercial is far and beyond more impactful than digital. So when you're running a 30-second spot with the right frequency and the right GRPs, you're really spreading out in terms of your impact on digital. You're cross-selling multiple products, and the impact that it has on the consumer is different than on digital, where people are more active, they know exactly what they're looking for, and it's more of a lower funnel activity. So they harmonize with each other, which is something that we tend to forget sometimes.
Now, is this going to be true in terms of our millennial friends? And again, over to you. Most noticed, most influential. Did you see the same thing there?
Yeah, so we actually had the same chart for millennials, and it was, instead of 55% most influential, it was 43%, but the pattern was exactly the same.
Okay, that's great. So this is all fantastic. This is all great. This is all great news for TV. So we've talked a lot today about delivery and outcomes, and a big focus on outcomes. So the most important, at least in the boardrooms that I've been in, the most important metric for the CEO is the sales and the money coming in the door. So tell me, how does TV drive and continue to drive business growth? Does it create sales? Does it create ROI?
Well, first I must say that the favorite word I've heard today is outcome. There's been a lot of that word outcome, and it's critical that we start shifting towards outcome and actual real business outcomes. I'm not sure if any of you have read the study by VAB that they did in the United States, where they measured correlations between spending TV and growth in revenue. So we replicated that study here in Canada, and we looked at the top 50 advertisers that spent on TV, and looked at their revenues and saw if there was the same correlation. And what we saw was they did index high in terms of revenues. So we went and zoomed in. We said, okay, let's look at the companies that spent the most in terms of growth from 2011 to 2015. And the companies that had over 30% increase in revenue recorded 21% increase, 30% increase in TV spend recorded a 21% increase in revenue versus that were less. So there is a correlation there that kind of indicates that the more you spend in television, the more revenue you are going to achieve.
Okay, so as a TV and not a TV or organization when it comes to digital, couldn't we say the same thing about digital, though?
You could say the same thing about digital, but again, really, we've got to stop comparing TV and digital. And to me, like one of the key things is, like if we look back 20 years ago, and we looked at those spends in TVs with jingles. You know, there was those jingles with the phone calls. You pick up the phone call and you call Domino's or McDonald's or whatever you wanted to. They never sat down and said, should I take money away from my call centers to put it into my TV? That's never a question, because they work together. That call center is the same as search today. You know, you're going to put a message out there into market. People are going to be interested, and they're going to take that action. And here's a good example of that. And Michael mentioned it earlier in the panel in the morning. This is Dell. Brand X is Dell. And Dell shut off their spend in 2011. All you're seeing in terms of branded search queries is a significant drop. And they haven't been able to catapult themselves back up again. So they went from, and I love search queries. Branded search queries is a good proxy for consideration. A lot of times I've seen there's a direct correlation between branded search queries and where those competitors stand in terms of revenue. And what we're seeing here is that direct effect of cutting off your TV spend. And now they've decided to reactivate their TV spend because they've noticed that they're so focused on the lower funnel. And Stuart Garvey mentioned this earlier. He said once you're not filling up that lower funnel, you're so worn out, your cost per acquisition actually goes up. And that's what's happening to them. The cost per acquisition is going significantly high, and the only way they're going to bring that back down again is to start reinvesting into TV and rebuilding all the equity. It's very difficult to rebuild an equity that you've already lost.
So that looks to me like a long-term play, and TV is often noted for its long-term play. What about in the short term? Yeah,
well, so this is an example of a company that cut off their TV and how that's impacted their digital. The same can be said for a company that increases spend in TV. So I can't share the client, but basically this was an econometric model that we did. And for anybody that's done market mix model, you'll notice that the results, they focus on short-term media-driven account openings. And it's always 15 to 20% of the total business sales are going to come from media. The rest is all coming from baseline activities, such as your awareness, your distribution, your accessibility. And we had a client, and in FY14, what they did was they increased their TV spend by 50%. And it was mainly because of a few product launches that they had. And when they did that, we saw immediately in that same year, there's a 21% increase in media attributed sales. And within the next year, there was an 8% increase to the baseline. So like further to that study that we did earlier, even with our own clients, when we're looking at it, we're seeing that the more they spend on TV, there's an incremental baseline and media attributed sales that's happening. So it's contributing to both the short term and to the long term.
And this is in combination with digital?
Absolutely, and especially for the short term. For the short term, like TV is demand generator.
Right.
Digital is demand capturer. You need to have both. You need to generate the demand and capture it, and that's how they work together. Yeah.
So this is an example. Do you have any other examples of TV driving, digital growth? I know we talk about it, but have you got anything concrete for me?
So some of the examples that I brought today was one of them was Expedia. So when we looked at Expedia, and it's very, 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 very important to look at data from all angles and really zoom down on the data that makes sense for you to make an immediate action. Trivago came into the market last year, and they spent a ton loads on television. And as they spent a ton loads on television, you saw the branded search queries increase for the entire industry. And what that meant was, Expedia is already one of the top 20 spenders in the Canadian market. We said, you know what, our competitors come in, they've spent on TV, there's activity that's going on in digital, let's go and capture it. So the conquesting campaign went full in. We went and basically saw the offer that they had in market during the time's Las Vegas trip, replicated the same offer, went fully conquested against them, against all of our competitors, because suddenly the pool increased. So monitoring your TV and reacting on digital is absolutely critical. TV is always going to drive that short-term activity in digital. There was another client that we had, which is a pizza client. And this, to me, was the most astonishing one. These numbers, I really almost fell off my seat when I saw it, but eventually it made sense to me. They have 8 windows during...
Okay, so you'll have to go slow because the rest of us are not as smart as you. Okay, go.
So this client have 8 windows during the year in which they advertise. And they never had a call to action to drive people to digital. And the reason being is because internally, if anything digital is attributed to e-commerce, anything non-digital is attributed to the offline team. It's bizarre, but they have an offline team and a digital team. So we said, guys, you've got to stop this. At the end of the day, you're both working towards revenue growth. So let's just give this a test. Let's have a call to action. Instead of driving people to the store or driving people to want the pizza, take them to the website. And with one simple call to action at the end of their creative, within that window of about 6 weeks window, there was a $2 million increase in net revenue.
That's a lot of pizza.
That's a lot of pizza,
Seif.
Yeah.
Wow.
And that's a simple call to action. So that's the one thing that we forget. A lot of the times the planners, we're sitting there and we're thinking, okay, you know what, I'm going to have this strategy for my long-term awareness. And then once I've built that awareness, I'm going to come in with this strategy. It's going to capture it. But they work simultaneously all the way through. As soon as you generate that demand, people have a phone in their pocket and they're ready to shoot, ready to create an action. You've just got to prompt them. And these are really disciplines that aren't new. They're very simple disciplines that we've known for a long time. We just tend to forget. We forget them because we're stuck in this digital or TV as opposed to how can I make them both work. Back to another comment made earlier about communications planning and how we can focus on all of the channels regardless of what screen it is. And focus on, people are going to be multi-channel, they're going to be multi-screen. How do we take the best out of both worlds? TV is the one that's going to generate it and instant capture through digital.
And I see you also experienced a cost per acquisition, a decline of 30%.
Well,
so it's a win on that front and a win in the television space as well.
Yep, well, that was the best part. Sometimes we're working on digital campaigns and we're so focused on decreasing cost per acquisition. And how can we do it? Sometimes we forget we're tapped out in terms of the pool. So you need to generate a pool of people that are ready and interested and emotionally invested into the brand or the product. And that's where TV helps a lot. All
right, so Seif, this television's coming out like a rock star today. I haven't really heard too many naysayers, and frankly, I'm a little bit concerned, especially in this new gig, that TV advertising isn't going through the roof yet. So why not?
Good question.
Thank you. My future depends on it.
Well, the main reason is because we're looking at the wrong metrics. We're thinking that TV is not measurable, and because of that, we're not building the right leverage to really sell TV. So this was one of many studies that are out there in the market, and this really made me almost fall off my seat, that click-through rates on ads are one of the biggest proxies that are used for ROI. Click-through rates cannot be taken to the boardroom. We're not having the right conversations. We're looking at the wrong metrics. We talk a lot about outcome metrics, but we're not really understanding what those outcomes are.
That's not an outcome metric in your view?
Absolutely not. I mean, if I was a CMO and I went to the sales and CRM team and told them, hey guys, I've got a really good click-through rate, and they don't see that in sales, I'm going to get fired.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So if this is what the marketers are looking at, I assume they're bringing that same messaging to the agencies who are feeling the pressure to fulfill a client's needs, correct?
Yeah.
And so how is that manifesting itself down the chain?
Well, that's where I see the biggest problem that we're having right now. It's right at the top when it comes to the brief. And if I see one more brief that tells me my target audience is 18 to 54, I'm gonna have to hit somebody. It's a very broad target audience, and we see clients, they don't know what their KPIs are, so we'll use those soft metrics. I had a client that was focused on acquisition campaign, and we built the entire campaign that was focused on acquisition, and then as soon as they realized that they couldn't implement any pixels on the website, they suddenly focused to awareness, and suddenly the new metric was impressions. Right. It wasn't credit card acquisitions.
Right.
So in terms of just defining the KPIs right from the get-go, I think there's a business conversation that needs to be held with a client that currently everybody's just passing on. We're getting a brief. It tells us it's a really broad target audience, awareness, hence impressions or GRPs, and then we're just taking that and holding everybody else accountable for it.
So in a sense, if I think about this just in back to first principles, what you're really, and what we've heard today about targeting and being precise, is actually something that you can achieve just by having a straight up conversation to the client to kind of get them to the place where they know what they want to target and achieve it in different ways.
Yes, and it's not an easy conversation to have. It does require, in my mind, a bit of business acumen. I don't want anybody to get me wrong. Like click-through rates, conversions, they're all good metrics, but the way I see it, they're more towards the delivery metrics. Like you've got your delivery metrics and you've got your outcome metrics, and you've got this trickle effect of metrics that matter. I mean, a conversion is really valuable if you know what the value of a conversion is. If you know that I get one conversion, that's going to translate into $5,000 of sales in terms of long term, and that's fantastic. But at the end of the day, no matter what we report to our CMO, they've got to go into the boardroom and they've got to talk about these metrics. They've got to talk about transactions, customer acquisitions, what's the average order value. And I think one of the biggest opportunities that we have, especially with addressable TV coming in, is customer segment values. And I think one of the sleepest giants that we have in this industry are the CRM companies. And if the CRM companies manage to master media, they're going to have an advantage over everybody else because they're really looking at communications planning, sequential messaging. They've been doing that for like tens of years, And when it comes to customer values, like for a bank, like they've got the students, they've got the newcomers, they've got the small businesses. Who do I need to be targeting? What is the cost per acquisition that I can afford for them? And how much customer lifetime value am I getting in return? Once we start segmenting that and we have those pools, then we're able to really connect two data points. Instead of having one cost per acquisition metric that we need to, and with programmatic TV, this is going to happen. We're going to start being accountable for cost per acquisitions. Instead of having one cost per acquisition for like 5 or 6 different segments, I need to be able to know that there's one segment that's very highly valuable and I can bid higher and pay 150 for this one versus 25 for this one. So we need to be able to do that if we're ever going to get anywhere close to one-to-one marketing communications. We can have all the technology in the world, all the data they want. I actually agree with what Mark Finney mentioned earlier, which is that we have so much data, but none of us are really activating it. I felt today, and I'm sorry if I ruffle any feathers here, but I felt today that we're having the same conversation that we've had 4 or 5 years ago, where we came in and we said we're going to use first-party data and we're going to do a lot of great things. But then as it went in, like you've got the implementation, you've got the technology, but when it comes to execution, where it really matters, we kind of, we let it go because we get too stuck in the day-to-days and we're not having those upfront business conversations that we need to be having.
So now, so in the agency itself, what data are you relying on then in terms of how are you fulfilling what you are fulfilling today?
Well, one of the biggest problems that we're having is that we're relying on tools that don't really measure ROI. And we did a little survey here to figure out.
So what you mean is the outcome ROI.
Yes. We look at when we did a little survey to figure out when it comes to planning, what are the tools that you're really relying on. There's a big emphasis on research tools like ComScore, Nielsen, Numeris, and although these tools are really great, they're really focused on engagements, reach, and how many people. It's going to differ from category to category. It's going to differ from client to client. Sometimes within the same client, it's going to differ from product to product. So we're focused and we're putting a huge emphasis on tools and studies by media vendors that sometimes have an interest to sell their own product, and they have magnificent studies that really show that ROI, but really that's a soft metric. What we really need to focus on is the client's sales data and the client's historical data. And the biggest challenge we're having is it's not as much an onus on media agencies as it is on the client. And a lot of clients don't want to share that data. I mean, a lot of times we want to implement custom audience targeting, we want to implement the first-party data, we want to get their sales data, but they're not willing to share it. And that makes it very difficult for us as a media agency, especially if we want to build leverage to tell a client, you need to spend more. You spend $1 with me, I can give you $5 back. Right. We're not having insight into that. So I think that's something that we really need to start collaborating with the clients on and really doing the best that we can to get that sales data, because without that sales data, we don't know what we're doing. And I think it's fair that we ask for that, because that's what we're held accountable for at the end of the day.
Right. So then, with that challenge, what is it that, and I assume that that's a challenge that is true of most agencies today. We've heard it before. What can you do? What are the other tools that are available to you right now that you can do, and if you don't have that client data?
Yeah. Well, so if you have access to the client data, and even if you don't have access to the sales, you can have a proxy to that, such as foot traffic or anything like that. My biggest tool that I found most useful for me is econometric modeling. And the beauty about econometric modeling is we can't afford to look at silos. And today some people have talked about silos, but I feel like sometimes we have silos within silos. So a lot of times we focus on paid media, thinking paid media is the only holy grail that's going to generate a lot of revenue. It's not. Paid media is going to drive 15 to 20%. Paid media is a very, very, very important factor that can fuel all the rest of the factors. But we need to know what those other factors are. You can have a media campaign that goes into market and is fantastic. The execution was great. It did really well for you 3 months ago, and it's not going to do well now. You need to know why. Maybe there was a competitive activity that happened. Maybe the disruptor that came into market. Maybe somebody had a better offer. Maybe there was a better solution. Maybe it was the weather. Maybe it was the gas prices. Maybe it was the unemployment rate. So with econometric modeling and statistical disciplines, you're able to really measure all of that. And this has been around since the 80s, but today it's more powerful than ever because of the sheer amount of data that we have access to.
Right. So and we've heard a lot about econometric modeling, but for me, what's the difference? What's the difference between the TV attribution modeling and the econometric modeling?
That's a very good question.
Yeah. No. Yeah. Justin, you can't stop. Anyway, okay, go ahead.
So
David Phillips, I'm going to cut into your time. Okay, go ahead.
I mean, just quickly going through this. I mean, one of the key things that econometric modeling is able to do is able to measure halo impact. So we ran a TV ad for one of our financial clients, and we were able to measure the impact that it had on driving deposits. There was a 10% drive in deposits, 2% drive in credit cards, and 5% drive in total. So you're able to not only measure your branded campaign in terms of what awareness and unaided and aided awareness it had, but also what type of acquisitions it's had across different lines of business. So that now you can not only optimize the media mix, but also optimize how much do I need to spend on credit cards versus deposits, or for an auto brand on which product do I need to sell on. Another thing that you can find out with econometric modeling is saturation curves. So here was a client where, for the first year they had a really good cost per acquisition. They decreased their spend by 57%, and the cost per acquisition increased by 55%. And the reason was because they were spending, but they weren't spending enough. So at what time am I spending too much? At what time am I spending not enough? So that's also an important thing that econometric modeling can tell you. And there's a lot of tools out there that anybody can really use. If you can't use econometric modeling, at Group M we have a tool called live attribution. There's tools out there called TV Squared, which measures the impact of TV directly on your digital performance. Visual IQ has digital top to bottom and bottom to top in terms of all the activities that are going on.
So the very first meeting, and I know now Justin's giving me a look, eh? Did you see that? Okay, so the very first meeting that we had, and what we'll do is make this presentation available on the thinktv website, and There's a bunch of key takeaways at the end that I think you'll all find extremely helpful. But the very first meeting we've had very cool, you showed me a very cool kind of econometric thing. I think we can just wrap with that, and hopefully it'll be as interesting to you guys as it was to me.
Yep.
So can we roll that tape?
Yeah, so this is kind of the tool that we use over at MediaCom. And what this tool enables us to do is we're able to look at paid media and its impact on earned and owned. So you're looking at the whole ecosystem. And really, it's really not a difficult thing to do. All we need to do is just measure the meta studies. So if we have one study that measures the correlation between your branded TV on your search, on your organic, on your website visits, and once we've isolated all of those, we start creating our own benchmarks. And I think that's probably one of the biggest things that biggest problems that we have. We're so focused on UK and US benchmarks instead of building our own. We need to start building our own benchmarks and start focusing on them. And again, just thinking about that connected system. We talked a lot about silos today, and that's one of the biggest problems is silos in reporting. So not only do we need to report on TV and your digital, but also what impacts TV having on my digital and vice versa.
Perfection. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Seif, and I hope you all enjoyed it. Again, everything else and the key takeaways are available on the Think TV website.
Thank you.